Claire Vernon has been Chief Executive Officer at JewishCare since January 2007. She came to the non-government sector after many years in senior executive roles in the New South Wales state government departments, starting her career as a social worker in the 1970s. Claire moved after 10 years as a caseworker into the Central Office of State Health to run statewide programs and quality reviews and develop policy in diverse areas such as women's health, NGO funding reform, violence against women and helping victims of crime. Claire moved to the Attorney General's Department to head up the New South Wales strategy to reduce violence against women and was the Director of Victims Services for 5 years, administering a $100 million victims compensation scheme, counselling services and restitution from offenders. She then moved to New South Wales Ageing, Disability and Home Care, and as a senior executive worked across portfolios relating to attendant care, closure of large residential institutions, allocation of HACC funding, and was General Manager, Home Care Services of New South Wales. Claire will be taking questions at the end of her address. Please note the number currently on your screen and submit any questions via text message to be read out later. This number will also be posted in the chat while Claire is speaking. Over to Claire.
Thank you for that, Leslie. The journey I want to talk about tonight is the JewishCare journey, which is about a growth in revenue from 2007 to 2020, from an $8 million revenue organisation to nearly $20 million, while maintaining a JCA, a Jewish Communal Appeal contribution of around $2 million over that time. That means that in 2007, 25% of our revenue was from community funds. It is now less than 10% of our community funds. And increased revenue goes hand in hand with increased expenditure. That is, more services and supports to the Jewish community. When looking at our four main areas of support, you can see that our spending in disability services went from $3 million to double to nearly over $6 million. Spending in our mental health program, a program in which I take particular pride, went from a $300,000 spend to $1.6 million this year. Our children and family was maintained and increased by 50%. Our spending in aged care went from $3 million to over $8 million. And our spending in corporate services was held steady despite the increase in activity. To understand how we achieved this massive injection of services for the Jewish community, I need to tell you about the context in which we operate and the changes to government funding. You would all be aware that over the last 30 years, all governments have continued to outsource the delivery of community services. That is, we moved from having government providers in disability, home care, to outsourcing, initially by competitive tender and block funding to mainly not-for-profit organisations, to individualised budgets now controlled by the person in need. That is, the funding no longer comes to organisations, but rather to individuals. This is reflected in two of the most significant reforms for the Australian government, the National Disability Insurance Scheme in 2016 and Consumer-Directed Care for the Elderly in 2015. What the government did was set out to establish a marketplace underpinned by an ideology that markets provide competitive prices, increased numbers of providers, choice for clients, and more control for purchasing services. And certainly in aged care, over the last 5 years, consumer-directed care led to a doubling of the number of aged care providers throughout Australia. And the marketplace is open to private, for-profit and not-for-profit. So JewishCare had to decide whether we were going to join the marketplace or be a source of information and referral for the Jewish community. Because to join the new marketplace, we identified we'd need to be able to compete on quality and price, broaden what we were offering to build choice, have an approach which was underpinned by client control, as opposed to a more traditional welfare practice by professional caseworkers. Put a price on things. How much would you pay JewishCare to deliver an hour of home support? How much would you pay to work in Pin 35 or to live in one of our 4 group homes for people with a disability? We needed to persuade staff that they could be budget managers and they needed to join the sales team, because JewishCare needed to be promoted as a provider in a marketplace. And being told that being niche and small would not survive the new marketplace. So we put together a strategy to survive and thrive and make sure the Jewish community did not miss out on new funding. Some of the things we did was we first of all set a goal to help everyone in the community access entitlements under government schemes. Because as you know, it's not always easy to be able to access, understand and apply for entitlements. And we spend a lot of time assisting people in that navigation. But most important, secondly, to get people to choose JewishCare to purchase services from. We created a business development role. We made sure we took our staff with us by being clear that we had no future as an organisation because the iceberg is melting. Build on what we do well, do what was within our capabilities and skills, and invest in IT and systems to manage a whole new world of purchasing and providing. We work to our strengths. We have community funding that provides that extra wraparound and over-service where needed. For example, families need to ring and talk and they were not put on the clock. We've got caring and committed staff who all wanted a future for JewishCare. A strategic board who were not afraid of taking risks. A new purpose-built centre in 2012 in Sabre Street. We restructured our foundations to accept bequests and donations and ultimately provide an income stream to JewishCare. And we understood our cost of services so we could set a price where we would break even. The benefits for the Jewish community are enormous. The Jewish community has, in JewishCare, a high quality provider where any margin we make is reinvested or used on community service. We're seen as an organisation for all of the community, compared to 14 years ago when I believe we were viewed as supporting only the poor and the marginalised in the community. Our significant reach into the community means that we're well positioned to be addressing community-wide issues such as reducing suicide rates, tackling domestic violence, and to respond to events like the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to continue to utilise 500 volunteers and ensure we are Sydney and New South Wales wide, and in addition employ a community worker within the ACT. We are seen as a trusted provider, so that when significant community funds such as the Jewish Emergency Relief Fund required administering for families impacted by COVID-19, JewishCare stepped up. And we've also seen increasing numbers of donors who are willing to provide endowment-type funding, serious funding for specific projects and programs. But most of all, to have increased income is all about more services and supports. For example, the growth in our mental health and wellbeing program has meant that over 60 members of the Jewish community living with mental illness now have access to individualised, intensive funded support, which would never have been possible with just community funds. So where are we now? We get consistently outstanding results when we survey our now 300 staff, even through periods of significant change, which show they are engaged, aware, committed. And in 2019, we won a national award for these results. We get outstanding client service results, and the majority of clients have chosen to stay with us. And we know that these two findings are linked. That is, you treat staff well, they deliver great client services. We've expanded our offering to give more choice. Art group, yoga, 2 programs, J Day in our kitchen hand, and now run in a refurbished folk centre next door. We continue to be the first point of call for the community, information, advice, referral and assistance, negotiating to get government funding for people. My main message is that the Jewish community now has a financially sustainable, community-based organisation doing great work. And as I prepare to leave JewishCare, I want to share with you some of what I've learned leading these changes. Have a plan, but always be ready to do something different. Earlier this year, the board approved our 3rd strategic plan since 2007. These 5-year plans set a roadmap for how the organisation needs to change and adapt. However, there are always opportunities that need to be seized, such as the 2010 capital appeal, building a new building, and there are always unknowns which need to be managed, such as COVID-19. My second lesson has been that community really counts and plays a critical role complementing, not replacing, government and business. And while the word community is often overused in common parlance, I found in the Jewish community a community where you can touch and feel the strength and resilience and commitment to making the world a better place. My third lesson has been about knowing your mission and sticking to it. Our mission has been about supporting independence and resilience, and this has informed many of our decisions. For example, building capacity in people living with mental health issues, encouraging people with an intellectual disability to increased support to live independent lives. My fourth lesson has been it is all about the people. When people in the community being supported by us think of JewishCare, it's not the CEO or the board of directors whom they think of. It is the frontline staff, the people who come into their homes, see them in our counselling rooms. These are the people who deliver the services that make the difference, and we've worked hard to build on quality, recruitment, induction and supervision, because I believe that culture always beats strategy. My final lesson is around reputation, something they say you can't buy. We work very hard at maintaining an excellent reputation with the people we support, volunteers and staff, and many stakeholders in the community and in government. Many clients are reluctant to share their personal stories about the challenges they've faced and how JewishCare has helped them. We respect and in some cases even encourage such a decision. However, enough clients have been willing to share their stories to ensure the community understands the incredible work we do and the lives that we've helped change. My final slide is about the challenges ahead. And I think the picture says it all. How to remain focused on the bottom line, because one of my favourite sayings is good intentions are not enough. while being passionate about our mission. Other challenges include government funding, which is subject to lots of uncertainty and unpredictability. And even while we're in a marketplace, the government sets the price for things such as the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I think we've recently seen an increased loss of confidence by the Australian community in the sector, whether it be private or not-for-profit, home care, disability providers. And I think this is exacerbated by recent Royal Commissions. There are enormous compliance costs of governance, standards, audits, and reporting, which providers carry. There's a very noisy and crowded marketplace, which you would all know, where competitors often have marketing which bears little resemblance to reality. And our challenge is how to keep JewishCare front of mind. Many new providers are not employing staff, but operating as the sort of labour hire Uber. And this can drive down prices. JewishCare is proud of a tradition of employing, supervising, training and managing staff. But will this make us uncompetitive going forward? And finally, human services run in an open and competitive marketplace doesn't always work well for our most vulnerable. And JewishCare needs to be the provider of last resort, the safety net, so that no one misses out. So, quite a journey and more to come. Thank you.
Claire, thank you so much for those wonderful words. If I can please hand over to Vic Aladeff, who will read out any questions. And at the appropriate time, Vic will also deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, Les. Thank you. We only have one question so far. I suspect they're coming in. The first question, Claire, is anything, curly one perhaps, anything that you would do differently if you had your 15 years over again?
I think the mistake I made was thinking that 5 years would be enough. I had a tradition of staying for 5 years in jobs throughout my career. As Leslie said, this was my first job in the not-for-profit sector. So that time has gone very, very quickly. So, yeah, and the other thing is people say to me, did you have a plan at the start? No, I don't think it's possible to plan in this area of change.
Claire, a question has just come in about mental health issues. This seems to be, says the questioner, a growing issue in our community. How do you see this challenge and for your successor?
Look, I think there's always been, as we all know, significant mental health issues in the community. I like to think one of the things we've been able to do is have a lot more conversations and a lot more openness. My observation 14 years ago is people didn't talk about it. A lot of families were living with people with significant mental illnesses. We ran a carer support group for a few years, and I remember just the strength of bringing families together to talk about something which they'd often kept secret from friends. So firstly, I think there's much more awareness and people are willing to talk about it. I certainly think we've seen an increase in anxiety, depression, and we all know that the worrying statistics around suicide. Having said that, mental health cuts across all our programs, whether it's the elderly, whether it's people with disability. So I think it's part and parcel of everything you do in human services these days. While we've got a specific program around mental health and wellbeing, all our staff are trained in mental health issues because it can be a significant thing in a lot of people's lives. I think we need to do a lot more for carers, for families. I think a lot of them really struggle, and while there could be supports for people themselves with a mental illness, I think generally carers can be left trying to get more support.
Claire, following on from that, in terms of depression, mental issues, how young do those issues impact? How young are your youngest clients, I guess, is the real question there.
Well, I think this came out probably about 10 years ago, wasn't it, when they started talking about the need for early intervention. And you might be aware we're on a consortium with Headspace, which has seen children as young as 8 to 12 through to 16. When I went to university, you were always taught that mental illness began to emerge at around age 18 to 22. I think we're now recognising that those 18 to 22-year-olds probably had issues earlier on that we just didn't pick up on. So I think there's been a lot of good work done, and Headspace is certainly a good model. I know the schools are doing a lot of work in partnership with JewishCare and other organisations. So I think, and again, that's where I'm saying I think parents need a lot of support through this to understand how to best approach the children, how to talk about it. People are often worried if they talk about it, then they might be exacerbating it. And I'm really proud of our Jewish suicide prevention strategy, which has seen, as you're aware, hundreds of community members doing mental health first aid training. So I think it's an ongoing challenge, and I think COVID's made it tougher for people. Having said that, I think it's also opened up a whole lot of online and virtual connections, which we probably underestimated before.
Which segues to a question that's come in. Can you give us some information, please, on how JewishCare integrates with other Jewish communal services, such as Jewish House and CAA? This is from Joshua Swift.
Yeah. Well, I think partnerships across the community have been an essential part of business. I can remember early on getting together with Montefiore, Centre on Ageing, Brene Brith Retirement Villages, looking at planning for the ageing in the community. You can't work these days without a network of relationships. Many of the people we support are supported by Jewish House. They attend Centre on Ageing, on COA. They live in Brene Brith retirement villages. Their children attend the schools. So it's integral to living in the community, which I think is fantastic, that there are so many resources in the community. So those relationships, and I think that's the challenge going forward, is to look at how we continue to work together and perhaps also create some efficiencies with community funds so there is less duplication in the community.
A question that's just come in. What is JewishCare doing to develop and employ young Jewish social workers?
Oh, I love young Jewish social workers. I remember when I started social work in 1974, I think, 74. It was the first time I'd met a significant number of Jewish people, and they're all mainly women, actually a few blokes, studying social work. And I'm often mentoring, coaching, supporting. We do a lot of placements for people, for social workers going through university. I really hope that we continue to encourage and grow them. I've always said it was a wonderful profession to start with for training, because it creates all sorts of opportunities for your career going forward. So yes, there's many, and I often say to the staff at JewishCare, I might not be able to offer you the next job. We are only a small organisation with 300 staff, but I want to make you the best applicant. And I really encourage a lot to go out, work in government, other not-for-profits. And yeah, there are a lot of Jewish social workers out there, which is fantastic.
Danny Hochberg, do you service clients outside of the Jewish community?
Generally, we don't. Having said that, we talked a bit before about, I talked a bit about margins and growth. Under consumer-directed care, which is home care for the elderly, we take everybody because that's an area where we can cover costs and create a margin, and that's really important. There are no community funds used in the delivery of home support services. In areas like the National Disability Insurance Scheme, we've taken a decision to fundamentally stay within the Jewish community. There is a very small margin on costs, around 2%. You can, and I have many colleagues in other disability organisations who are really struggling with the NDIS. So we're very reluctant to be exposing community funds to supporting people outside the Jewish community. So we generally stay within the Jewish community. Probably 90% of our clients, 95% of our clients would be from within the community.
A question from the President, Les.
Claire, firstly, I neglected to thank you for your participation in the Jewish Emergency Management Plan, where you're involved with a subcommittee to do with wellness and mental well-being. So thank you very much for your assistance in that regard. It is most appreciated. And as we've seen from some of the questions, there has been a focus on mental well-being. And I was wondering if you could please tell the plenum what you've noticed since the onset of COVID. As per media reports, are you seeing an increase in mental health issues?
I think like all people we support, as I say, whether it's the elderly or families in financial distress, which we're seeing many hundreds of at the moment, we're always doing that checking in around mental health. So I think certainly there's an increased emphasis on people's mental and emotional well-being. For people who live with a significant mental illness, we did see a trend of people coming back to us, people who had previously been well, who suddenly required a hospitalisation, people who are often managing pretty much every day, living with their mental illness, but COVID tipped some of them over and they needed to come back and see one of the staff. So I think for everybody, and I also want to emphasise the 300 staff, 200 of whom were out every day in people's homes, really a focus on the mental health and wellbeing of the staff. I got staff back into the office the end of July, feeling to some extent that if we were running services out there, we needed to be around to support our field staff. So, look, I think it's taking an enormous toll on everybody. And I think we'll continue to learn really about, particularly with young people, about how they're seeing their futures and how they're now thinking about a world which has become a bit more scary.
Interesting question from Lauren Moorman. Interested in your perspectives on domestic violence in the community. Are the factors which are driving these within the Jewish community different to those within the wider community? And how does JewishCare support victims and their children?
You know, you can see, you would have heard from my background that it was I worked for a long time in the areas of violence against women. And I always felt that one of the best ways to be responding was by not just supporting the women escaping violent situations, but also going into the schools, running programs like Love Bites about healthy relationships, and running things like the White Ribbon Day, the Men's White Ribbon Day. So everyone takes responsibility. And we'll be doing a lot more work shortly on with a no abuse campaign. My perception, having worked across domestic violence in a lot of organisations, is it happens everywhere. It happens in marriages which you wouldn't be thinking it happens in. Women need to be able to talk about it safely, and our social workers are providing often that listening ear, which might escalate to a safety plan, which might escalate to somebody needing to get out. Yeah, I think it's, And I think the impact on children that we all know, people said, you know, they describe it as living with a terrorist, terrified to come home, terrified about what's going to tip people over the balance. So I think those sort of homes that are in the community are really scary places, and we need to continue to give the message that the behaviour is not acceptable, and that it's everybody's responsibility. It's not behind closed doors, which was one of the campaigns we ran very early on, was to say just because it's private doesn't mean it's okay. I think it's another big challenge, and we just need to, we need to keep doing more. I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg of the women who are coming to us. I think there's a lot of others where they tolerate situations which are really intolerable.
The question from Greg Weiss. You mentioned that culture always beats strategy. Could you share what made you sure of this?
What makes me sure of this?
Yes.
I mean, I've been watching, as I'm sure we have all, with interest about the Royal Commissions into aged care and disability, about whether it's numbers of staff or types of staff, supervision of staff. I believe you can almost walk into an organisation and feel the culture, whether people feel informed, aware, supported. Working with vulnerable people is a really tough career choice, and I don't think we often give enough credit to people who every day are working with vulnerable people. So I believe that if you, and there is research which says that if you support staff, they do great client service. So that's where I believe if you've got a strong organisational culture with responsibility and leadership all the way throughout the organisation, that beats any piece of paper or any strategy that we could be putting on the wall. So that's what I mean about culture beats strategy.
Question from Heath Sloan. What do you anticipate will be the most pressing issues facing the community in the next few years? And how does JewishCare plan to provide the services to address these?
Well, I think there's been a lot of attention on ageing. We know the baby boomers are coming towards aged care. I would like to think we can persuade people to begin to do a bit of planning around their aged care, to be informed about what options will exist and then make decisions about what support they need. The statistics are overwhelmingly that people want to stay living in their own home. The Royal Commission into aged care may be delivering more care at home, but at the moment, most people can get from a government package around 15 hours a week of support. 15 hours a week of support is not a lot of care. So I think ageing, dementia, supporting, again, the carers of people with dementia, I think that ageing is a big consideration. And then I also think supporting people with a disability to live independently, to work in open employment, which is another big project that we're running at the moment. Print 35 works for some people. In fact, we've got 25 supported employees now, whereas I think a lot of them could be working in mainstream and often Jewish organisations in just regular jobs. And I think families with young people with a disability will be demanding that sort of inclusion going forward. As we've mentioned, mental health, disability. I think the challenge for the organisation, I've named a few of them. I think mentioning the Uber hire of staff, we shouldn't be surprised that there are cheaper options for people to be purchasing their care. It's a model which JewishCare, as I said, has always had. So I think that will be a challenge for us because it's very hard to be competitive on price when there is labour hire companies competing against us. So yeah, a whole lot of challenges, But I think we're well placed. I think, as you saw at the beginning, less reliance on community funds, more financially self-sustaining. I think that puts us in a really great position to be rising to the challenges. And I think being less reliant on community fundraising is critical for a lot of community organisations at the moment.
I have one final question, Claire. Can you say anything about your bereavement program and how to approach it when, God forbid, it happens?
Sure. I must say, when I went to JewishCare, we used to have a long list. I think there were 25 programs, and we used to describe these 25 programs, such as supporting inmates and bereavement counselling and other things. And I guess my approach has been, if people are in pain, in need, they come to JewishCare, they talk to our intake officer, and we have a lot of wraparound services like financial counselling. We do have a team where bereavement counselling is provided, and that we also have a booklet on cultural issues around grief and loss, and we also have done a lot of talks and groups over the time. It's one of those things which is going to happen in life, and majority of people come through with their families and friends through really tough times. For some people, they either don't have family and friends, or the grief is reaching a point where it is disabling in their lives. And that's when we encourage people to see one of our counsellors. We run a support group for families impacted by suicide. Again, that's a group of people who need to come together and share each other's pain and support each other. So it's a good question. It's just one of those examples of one of those many things that we do, which we try and encourage people, as I say, to come to us, and then we're able to assist them in lots of different ways.
That concludes the questions. And if I may continue the mantle, as Leslie said, to draw the section to a close, just to deliver a vote of thanks. It's Claire, you titled your presentation this evening "From Welfare to Community Business," and that's what you have done. And as you said yourself, there has been a massive injection of services to the community. I regard myself as one who has been steeped in the community forever, and yet I have to confess, because you have built this organization brick by brick, one as an outsider to JewishCare and almost hasn't noticed how it has evolved from welfare to a major business. And this is to your absolute credit, obviously with the board around you. And what you have done is an incredible, is to build an incredible organization, best practice, world-class organization, which delivers such vital services to the community. And from a tiny organization to a massive business, as you illustrated with the funds, with the figures, which you mentioned at the outset. So, and two of the responses from people on this call were not questions, but mere compliments to you, to say sorry to see you go and congratulations. So on behalf of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, on behalf of the community, we thank you, applaud you, salute you for your amazing work and achievement over the years. And you don't have to answer this question, but you're welcome to join the community anytime.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay, thanks.
Claire, thank you so much. On behalf of the New South Wales Jewish community, thank you for your service. Thank you for your support. Your insights, I mentioned it briefly before, during the GEMP process, your assistance were most appreciated. Our community was stronger for your efforts, and we're going to be weaker for your loss. So thank you so much for everything you've done. And one thing I noticed, which was amazing, is that you're back in the office in July, which is very brave. One deputy just texted me, very brave, and they wrote, they gave the strong emoji, the strong emoji. That was actually from one of my vice presidents, Natalie Samia.
Fantastic.
So very strong. And just something for deputies, we will, in fact, with your consent, of course, we'll be moving to a hybrid model for our future plenum so that we can meet again in person in a COVID-safe manner. And Claire, this will probably be the last plenum that we'll do online only for a while. And please God, may the infection remain very low in New South Wales so that we can all meet again in person. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.